marginalized communities. All of these things will help our communities keep their water safe and clean. Something I'm particularly proud of is how this bill provides flexibility to both rural and urban areas and let them decide how they can best address their needs. The most significant investments in this bill are in the drinking water and clean water state revolving funds, as we know them, SRFs. The SRFs maximize authority for the states to determine how best to address drinking and wastewater challenges, utilizing a revolving loan fund to facilitate additional future investments. For rural states like West Virginia, we offer several solutions to unique water challenges. I will add here, we have a little great water in West Virginia. First, the bill invests $50 billion for those currently being served by intractable water systems. Those are the systems that service fewer than 1,000 people and that have typically been abandoned by the operator. We have quite a few of those. Towns in the southern coal fields of West Virginia, like those in McDowell County, have historically struggled with this. Since many of these households cannot connect to municipal water systems in an economic or technologically feasible way, the funding will go to a grant program to help them install environmentally sound, decentralized wastewater systems. This language was something that I worked on previously with my colleague from New Jersey, Cory Booker, when he was on the committee in the last Congress. The most pressing water issue from a human health and environmental perspective in Appalachia is undoubtedly straight piping. This practice is common in other exceptionally rural and remote areas around the country. So with new septic tanks installed, the grant program is working to improve quality of life and addresses public health and environmental concerns about straight piping waste into rivers and streams. Infrastructure resiliency and sustainability is also a priority in this bill. In rural areas especially, some of the pipes are nearly 100 years old. I've actually heard about wooden pipes. Small towns often don't have the revenues to spend on expensive drinking water and wastewater infrastructure upgrades. That's why this legislation creates grants for small public water systems to replace components, to identify and prevent leaks, and to install meters. This is based off of language I introduced last Congress in the Assuring Quality Water Infrastructure Act. I was joined there by my colleague Ben Cardin of Maryland to address the needs of small water systems that are facing operational challenges in maintaining drinking water services. We have them, every state has them. In West Virginia, that is often the result of old infrastructure or the lack of adequate mapping of where these assets actually exist. It is hard to fix leaks when you can't find them. Reports have shown, this stunned me when I saw this, reports have shown that only 1/4 of the water that West Virginia water systems pay to have treated and pumped even reaches a faucet. 1/4, that's how much water leaks out. And I think about my other states who have water shortages, and here we are wasting so much water in a state like ours who has an abundance of water. Water is a precious resource, and wasting that much of it because of leaky pipes and faulty infrastructure is absolutely unacceptable. The $250 million grant program will help provide the technical assistance and infrastructure investments these small systems serving 10,000 people or fewer need to address to get those challenges off their back and to get on sure fiscal footing for as they better serve their customers. Of course, we don't want to forget about our mid-size and large drinking water systems. Another program that I worked on last Congress, again with Senator Cardin, addresses the resiliency of drinking water and wastewater systems. Adapted by the Clean Infrastructure Resilience and Sustainability Act, these programs totaling $370 million over 5 years will help protect public water systems from a host of threats, both natural and man-made. In West Virginia and many other parts of the country, the greatest threats to drinking and wastewater infrastructure comes from flooding. These investments will harden infrastructure against these threats and protect taxpayers from paying for the same infrastructure again and again. I just discussed physical resilience, but we must also ensure the resilience of our water utility workforce, those workers who ensure the continued operation and maintenance of drinking water and wastewater systems every day. Section 211 of DWEA focuses on the resilience of America's water utility workforce by addressing recruitment, training, and retention challenges. This is a topic very important with me, and I worked again with my colleague from New Jersey, Senator Booker, on this issue. I cannot help but think that we regularly take for granted the public health services provided by this nation's water utility workforce. Just don't really think about who's actually working there and providing the service that we sometimes take for granted. Unfortunately, a large portion of the men and women who are in our water treatment facilities are getting older and they're retiring. And that's why we need to make sure that we have the next generation of water workers ready. This bill increases funding rise to $25 million over 5 years for a program that helps water systems grow their workforce through apprenticeships, through training programs, and it also helps with their retention efforts. This program has been extremely popular with water systems around the country, and Congress has recognized this by funding it beyond the authorization level. It is critical that we provide the tools and investments necessary to help our drinking water and wastewater systems face these challenges on. After all, this is the workforce that will ensure the operation and maintenance of all the other infrastructure investments this package creates. Additional technical assistance can also help systems with operations. It's much more complicated than what it used to be, and prevent outages and costly compliance issues. Section 206 establishes and authorizes a circuit rider program designed to help owners and operators of small and medium-sized publicly owned treatment works. We have heard from the water community that other circuit rider programs have been a tremendous asset in providing technical assistance. It only makes sense for the EPA to similarly provide technical assistance since they implement the relevant regulations. This can be tremendously helpful where a system may be struggling with an insufficient workforce and also must be a part of the resilience discussion. Another concern for us was the alarming trend in cybersecurity threats in water systems. In February, you all might remember, hackers accessed a Florida water treatment facility computer system and were able to remotely raise the level of sodium hydroxide in the water. I mean, that is not just scary, it's alarming. This has huge national security implications on top of the obvious public health concerns. Thankfully, that hack was detected and the system was returned to normal before the public was ever at risk. But in this day and age, water infrastructure resiliency also has to include addressing these cybersecurity issues. So we made sure that these vulnerabilities could be addressed under resiliency grants. While water infrastructure investments are critical to ensuring we're not wasting water and our water is clean, it is also critical to the from an economic development perspective. Berkeley County, close here to Washington, D.C., in West Virginia, made huge investments into their water infrastructure system to ensure the system could handle the volume of water that the brand new Procter & Gamble plant needed. And it's massive amounts of water and it's a massive plant. And we're very happy they're there employing over 1,000 West Virginians. So with that upgraded water system, PG was able to operate more efficiently and even to expand, and they're still expanding. And that meant more jobs. That kind of opportunity needs to be available everywhere, not just in my home state, Connecticut, and other places around the country. These are just a few of the provisions that address and are informed by the particular challenges that face my state. But based on the feedback of my colleagues in both parties, and the groundswell of support from various water advocacy groups, it is clear these provisions have broad applicability to help communities all across this beautiful country. It is why we have such a diverse and growing coalition of more than 70 supporters from water systems to local governments, to industry, to labor, to environmental organizations who are supporting this legislation. These organizations, not to mention we had a unanimous vote out of a committee, these organizations recognize the value of this legislation and its common sense and responsible approach to addressing our water infrastructure issues. We will be discussing more of the value provisions of this bill on the Senate floor this week, and I look forward to that debate. In closing, I just want to urge my colleagues to vote in favor of advancing this bill and later for final passage. I mentioned it passed unanimously out of committee. There's a big debate in a broader sense. Can Congress get together on infrastructure? This is what I would define as basic core infrastructure. This, I think, is a good test case for us. And this, I think, is one in which we all have great interest. Conservatives, moderates, and liberals all came together on this. I'd like to thank my counterpart, my chairman, Chairman Carper, and his staff for their work, as well as our water subcommittee counterpart, Chairman Duckworth, and Ranking Member Lummis. This bill is proof that we can work together on infrastructure. This is a bipartisan, responsible, meaningful investment. We're taking care of pipes, we're looking out for our environment, and we're putting special emphasis on helping rural and disadvantaged communities. At the end of the day, this bill is really about helping people. This is a bipartisan bill that we can all be proud of. I again ask my colleagues to vote yes on the motion to proceed, and again on the underlying bill, and I yield the floor, and thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
The senator from Alaska.
Mr. President, I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
We are in a quorum call right now. We are not in a quorum call. The senator is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to be able to complete my remarks, given
Without
the time
objection.
restraints.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to oppose Colin Kahl's nomination for Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, and I advise my colleagues to do the same as we are getting ready to take a vote on this very important position in the Pentagon that, to me, is one of the most important positions we have at the Department of Defense. While I have many policy disagreements with Dr. Kahl, which I've discussed at length with him, I want to say I have a long history of working across the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, on defense issues, even with those who I don't agree with their policies on. Matter of fact, the presiding officer and I have a very strong working relationship, and we don't agree on a lot of issues, but particularly on issues of the military. I serve on the Armed Services Committee. I take these matters very seriously. They're one of the main reasons I ran for the U.S. Senate 6.5 years ago. And I focus a lot on the military personnel, uniform and civilian, that we put in Pentagon that have this enormous responsibility to oversee the Department of Defense. And whether it's assistant secretaries, undersecretaries, admirals, generals, I try to understand where they're coming from. And I have a record of strongly supporting almost all of them, whether in the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and even in the Biden administration. For example, I not only supported the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, knowing that I wasn't going to agree with him on everything. I actually introduced him at his confirmation hearing because I served with him in the military a number of years ago. And I know he's a man of honor and character. I strongly supported the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Kath Hicks, given her background and knowledge. But some nominees I have not and I will not support, particularly in this area that's so important to our nation's defense. I will object to these people because, like Dr. Kahl, I don't believe he has the temperament or judgment to do the job. And like I said, Mr. President, I have looked at and focused on dozens and dozens of members who need Senate confirmation in the Department of Defense, their temperament and judgment. The vast, vast majority, Democrat or Republican, I've supported. But not this one. And this is a really important position. The Undersecretary of Defense for Policy is essentially the number 3 position in the Pentagon. And as I mentioned, it's my view, and I believe most of my colleagues' view, at least on this side of the aisle, that Dr. Kahl does not have the temperament or judgment. And in fact, I believe that he has potential to be a liability to our national security and our defense, and not to be viewed favorably by the men and women he is supposed to lead. Let me talk about temperament, Mr. President, and a little bit of background. Not even a year ago, a number of Senate Democrats, my colleagues, wrote the official who was nominated by the Trump administration for this same position, Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, Brigadier General Anthony Tata. And the letter, which was signed by a number of my Senate Democrat colleagues, many of whom are on the Armed Services Committee, focused on that nominee's record of, quote, offensive and inflammatory comments, which would disqualify you from serving in your current position in the position for which you have been nominated. That's one of the quotes. Remember, same position, Trump administration. This letter also said that he had made inflammatory remarks regarding the president, that would be President Obama, and inflammatory remarks regarding rhetoric for members of Congress as well. Again, that was last year. This is the standard that was being used. This letter goes on to say your multiple past statements cannot be dismissed as simple an aberration. So I mentioned this letter, Mr. President, and I'd like to submit it for the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Because you have almost the identical situation here. What happened with General Tata is that his nomination, for a lot of these reasons, was withdrawn by the Trump administration. But now, when you have the same, almost identical issues with this nominee, when I've showed this letter to my Democratic colleagues, they're like, oh, no, that's okay. It's not okay. It's not okay. So let's talk about temperament. Tweets. Dr. Call has been really the issue here is he more of a political hack who's tweeting all the time? He tweets quite a lot. Or in somebody with the temperament of a partisan internet troll? Or is he a measured national security professional who can lead the Pentagon in the number 3 position? Unfortunately, I think it's the former issue, not the latter. He's got a long history of tweets. And just like the issues that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle objected to last year for this same position,
Perfect.